rock without looking. A silhouette on a ridge that could be lifted from any painting of the Old West. The horse, running free, belonging to nobody. But that horse is not what it appears to be. Genetically, biologically, by every official account, the wild horse is not native to this land. It's here because it escaped, or was abandoned, or was set loose by armies that no longer exist. And yet it has become one of the most fiercely protected, fiercely fought over animals in the United States. There's a mystery buried in that contradiction. A government once captured a single wild stallion, America's most famous, and then let it go, because the public wouldn't allow anything else. We're going to find out why. Because to understand the wild horse in America today, you have to understand two things pulling against each other. An animal built for a world with no fences, surviving in a country that's now almost entirely fenced. This is the story of the space in between. Late spring, high desert. The grass is still green enough to matter, and that means it's fighting season. Two bachelor stallions face off at the edge of a wash. Neither is older than 4. Ears pinned flat, necks arched, they begin to circle. Not attacking yet, just measuring. This is sparring, not war. Bachelor stallions do this for hours at a time, sometimes daily, rearing onto their hind legs, striking with their front hooves, never quite connecting with full force. It looks brutal. It isn't meant to be. It's rehearsal. Then one of them breaks the pattern. It drops its head low, charges, and sinks its teeth into the other's neck. The crack of jaw on hide carries across the wash. That's the shift. Sparring just became something else. A stallion's entire future, whether it ever leads a band of its own, ever passes on a single gene, can come down to fights like this one. When a mare comes into season, or when an aging stallion's grip on its harem starts to slip, sparring turns real. Rearing becomes striking. Biting draws blood. Stallions have been blinded in one eye, crippled, occasionally killed, over the right to breed. The two horses separate, chests heaving, dust still hanging in the air, neither one giving ground. This particular fight ends in a draw. But somewhere in these same mountains, one stallion is about to lose everything it has. And the horse that takes it will become the most famous wild horse in American history. We'll meet it shortly. To understand why that fight mattered, you have to understand how a wild horse herd is actually built, and it isn't built the way most people assume. There are 3 kinds of social units on the range. The first is the harem band, one adult stallion, several mares, their foals. But the stallion isn't the one leading the group from place to place. That job belongs to the lead mare, usually the oldest, most experienced female in the band. It decides where the herd travels, where it drinks, when it moves off at the first sign of danger. The stallion's role is different. It walks at the rear, it watches the perimeter. It's the last line of defense, not the first. The second unit is the bachelor band, young males kicked out of their birth herd around the age of 2, banding together in loose groups of 2 to 6. This is where all that sparring happens. It isn't just play, It's the only training ground they'll ever get before they're expected to fight for real. And the third is the loner, a stallion that has lost its band, usually to age, injury, or defeat. It may spend years alone, trailing behind other herds at a distance, waiting for an opening that may never come. Every fight, every friendship, every long walk to water traces back to one of these three roles. And somewhere in the mountains straddling Montana and Wyoming, one stallion's fate is about to be decided not by a rival at all, but by something stranger than any fight on this range. A camera, a stranger, simple, enormous luck. Before we meet that stallion, the land goes quiet for a moment. Wind moves through dry grass. A fence post, gray with age, leans at the edge of a field that hasn't held cattle in years. Maybe you know a place like this. Maybe your grandfather kept horses on land like this one, out past the edge of town, where the pavement used to stop. Maybe you rode as a kid, on a ranch, at a fair, at a summer camp you haven't thought about in decades. The smell of hay and leather, the particular sound a horse makes when it exhales. For most of American history, the horse wasn't a symbol. It was a tool, a partner, a member of the household. Whole towns were built around it. Liveries, farriers, blacksmiths, feed stores, roads shaped by where a horse could and couldn't go. Most of that world is gone now, replaced mile by engines. But the wild horses still out here are, in a strange way, a living thread back to it. The last visible piece of an America that ran on hoofbeats instead of horsepower. Maybe that memory is still sitting somewhere in the back of your mind right now. We'd genuinely like to hear it. Tell us in the comments. That same pull, memory, and what we choose to hold on to is exactly what drives the story ahead. Because in the Pryor Mountains, one ordinary morning, someone happened to point a camera at exactly the right foal. "70 miles east of Yellowstone, in the Badlands near Cody, Wyoming, a herd grazes that looks almost too colorful to be wild. Bay, buckskin, palomino, roan, pinto. The McCullough Peaks herd carries one of the widest color ranges of any wild horse population in the country, paired with a build so solid, so well-conditioned, that adopters specifically request horses from this herd by name. In the world of wild horse management, McCullough Peaks has become its own kind of reputation, a brand almost built entirely on genetics and grass. But 60 miles northeast, straddling the Montana-Wyoming line, a different herd holds a different kind of fame. The Pryor Mountains are home to roughly 200 wild horses, isolated in rugged terrain for so long that biologists consider the herd one of the most distinct in North America. In the spring of 1995, inside this herd, a foal was born almost white, pale enough that early observers weren't sure it would survive its first season. A documentary filmmaker happened to be there. She kept coming back. Over the following years, she filmed that foal grow from a wobbly-legged colt into a full-band stallion. Footage that would eventually become 3 documentaries for public television, tracking one wild animal from birth further and more continuously than almost any other project of its kind. The horse she named Cloud became, for an entire generation of American viewers, the face of the wild Mustang itself. Cloud's story wasn't gentle, As a young stallion, it lost fight after fight trying to win a band of its own. Then, in its prime, Cloud went head-to-head with a rival named Plenty Coups for control of a harem. The same kind of collision you watched at the start of this film, teeth and hooves and raw nerve, decided in minutes. Cloud won. And in 2009, when a federal roundup gathered dozens of Pryor Mountain horses off the range, Cloud was swept up along with the rest of them, headed, like the others, toward holding pens and an uncertain future. But by then, Cloud wasn't just a wild horse. It was recognizable. Word got out. Public pressure built fast enough that wildlife managers made an unusual call. They returned Cloud to the range. It's a small detail with a large implication. A single animal, known well enough by name, became powerful enough to bend federal policy, even briefly. It's the clearest evidence in this entire story that how the public feels about wild horses shapes what actually happens to them, as much as any biologist's recommendation does. Cloud lived out the rest of its days on the mountain that made it famous. Its descendants still graze there today. South of the Pryors, the story changes tone. Northern Arizona has spent recent years locked in extreme drought, large stretches of the region moving between severe and extreme conditions year after year. For wild horses, that isn't a headline, it's a countdown. Bands near the Salt River, close to Phoenix, and others scattered through the Navajo Nation and nearby range country have started doing something their ancestors rarely needed to do, leaving traditional territory entirely. They cross fence lines built for cattle. They walk highway shoulders. Some have been seen at the edge of suburban backyards, drawn in by the one thing a lawn sprinkler can offer that the desert can't. Ranchers in the region have described hauling water by hand, weekend after weekend, just to keep their own livestock alive after windmill pumps that once supplied it stopped working. When the humans who share this land are struggling to find water, the horses are struggling right alongside them, increasingly competing for the same shrinking supply. This isn't the romantic image of a Mustang running free across open country. It's an animal and a rancher both staring at the same dry stock tank, needing the same thing, with less of it every year. And sometimes the math simply doesn't work out. In one especially hard drought year, more than 100 wild horses were found dead around a muddy stock pond in northern Arizona after the water that fed it disappeared entirely. It's one of the starkest reminders in this entire story. Freedom without water isn't freedom. It's just a slower kind of fence, hundreds of miles east in Nevada. The same pressure is playing out on a scale that's almost impossible to picture until you see the numbers. Nevada holds more wild horses than any other state in the country by a wide margin. More than half of America's entire wild horse and burro population lives within its borders. That number alone explains why Nevada sits at the center of nearly every major fight over wild horse policy. Federal land managers set what they call an appropriate management level, a population ceiling meant to balance horse numbers against available forage and water. Across much of Nevada's range, actual populations run well above that ceiling, sometimes by several times over. The math is unforgiving. A healthy, unmanaged wild horse population can nearly double every 4 years. Without large predators to check that growth, wolves and mountain lions take only a small fraction of foals. Herds can outgrow their range faster than the range can recover. That collision, animal biology against finite grassland, is the single hardest problem in this entire story. It has no clean answer. Fewer horses means healthier range and healthier remaining herds. But it also means removals, holding pens, and hard questions about what wild really means for an animal being actively managed down to a target number. There's no villain in this segment. There's just arithmetic playing out across a landscape that was never going to support unlimited growth of anything. Northward, in the mountains straddling Montana and Wyoming, that same tension over origins and belonging takes a very different shape. Written not in population counts, but in DNA. Return to the Pryor Mountains, home of Cloud and its descendants, because this herd sits at the center of a genetic puzzle that's been running for decades. The first clue goes back to the 1990s, to the work of geneticist Gus Cothran, and it's held up under more recent DNA testing since. Pryor Mountain horses carry a higher than average level of ancestry linked to early Spanish saddle-type horses, including a rare genetic marker traced directly back to the original Iberian horses brought to the Americas in the colonial era. Federal land managers note one important caveat, though. Every one of those genetic markers also shows up in other unrelated breeds. None of them alone proves an unbroken bloodline. Then, in March of 2023, a second piece of evidence complicated the picture. A landmark study in the journal Science, led jointly by Western geneticists and Indigenous scientists, including researchers from the Lakota Nation, tested archaeological horse remains across the American West. The results reshaped the textbook timeline. Horses of Spanish origin were already being raised and traded deep into the northern Rockies and Great Plains by the early 1600s, decades earlier than previously assumed. In a pattern that matches Indigenous oral history far more closely than it matches the old written record. And that same research team went further, testing something else entirely. 2 Ice Age horse remains recovered in Alaska, more than 26,000 years old. If wild horses had truly survived in North America continuously since before the Ice Age, this is where the evidence should show it. It didn't. No genetic link was found between those ancient remains and any horse population alive today. 3 pieces of evidence, 3 different timelines. One question still without a single agreed-upon answer. Is the Pryor Mountain Mustang a nearly unbroken thread back to the first horses of the Spanish era, or something that arrived even more recently than that, shaped almost entirely by trade, escape, and time? Even the scientists studying it can't fully agree. So we'll leave that one with you. Tell us where you land in the comments. The Mustangs themselves, of course, keep grazing, indifferent to the argument being conducted in their name. West across 3 states, in the high desert canyons of southeastern Oregon, a herd survives that looks like it stepped out of a much older painting. The Kiger Mustangs are almost uniformly dun-colored, tan to reddish coats marked with a dark stripe running the length of the spine and faint horizontal barring on the legs. A pattern scientists call primitive because it echoes markings found in some of the earliest domesticated horse populations on record. Genetic testing in the mid-2000s confirmed what their appearance had long suggested. This herd carries some of the strongest Iberian genetic signatures of any wild population in the country. The Kiger herd management area was deliberately set up in the late 1970s to protect exactly this. a small, genetically distinct population, isolated in rugged canyon country, specifically so outside bloodlines couldn't dilute it. It's worked. Kiger horses today remain visibly, measurably different from the mixed ancestry herds just a few hundred miles away. But isolation cuts two ways. The same canyon walls that protect the herd's genetic identity also limit its size. Small, closed populations are more vulnerable to inbreeding over time, a trade-off wildlife managers have to weigh constantly. Protect the bloodline and risk the population, open the bloodline and lose what made it worth protecting in the first place. For now, the Kiger horses remain what they were designed to be. A living genetic time capsule running through canyon country that hasn't changed much in centuries, even if almost everything around it has. Southeast into Utah's high desert, the terrain turns even harsher, and the horses that live in it have adapted accordingly. The Sulphur herd, isolated within Utah's Needle Range, is small, compact-bodied, tough-footed, built for country with almost no water and even less shade. Like the Pryor and Kiger herds, Sulphur horses have been confirmed through mitochondrial DNA sequencing to carry strong Spanish colonial ancestry, making these three herds, Pryor, Kiger, and Sulphur, the closest thing the American wild horse population has to a genetically documented through line. Back to the colonial era. What sets Sulphur apart is where that ancestry survives. Not on lush grassland, but on some of the least forgiving terrain any wild horse population calls home. Summers here regularly exceed 100 degrees. Water sources are scattered and unreliable, and yet the herd persists generation after generation on a landscape that would kill most domestic horse breeds within a season. That resilience isn't an accident. It's centuries of selection pressure written into the body of every horse still standing out here. Smaller frames that need less forage, tougher hooves that need no shoeing, a metabolism built for scarcity rather than abundance. It's a reminder that wild isn't just a legal status. On land like this, it's a physical adaptation, earned the hard way, one dry summer at a time. Cross the entire continent, and the story changes completely, from desert scarcity to coastal abundance, and from federal range management to something far stranger. On a barrier island straddling the Virginia-Maryland line, wild ponies wade through salt marsh grass, drink from brackish pools, and occasionally swim between islands at low tide. Assateague and Chincoteague ponies are smaller than most range Mustangs, rarely taller than 14 hands. A trait most researchers attribute not to Spanish shipwreck legend, as local folklore insists, but to something far less romantic. Generations spent eating tough, salt-heavy marsh grass on an island with limited fresh water and no room to grow. Two herds share this landscape, separated by a fence at the state line and managed by two entirely different organizations. On the Maryland side, the National Park Service manages the herd as wildlife, keeping numbers low through fertility control. On the Virginia side, a volunteer fire company manages the herd as technically livestock. And each July, drives a portion of the herd across the channel in the famous pony swim, selling foals at public auction to fund the fire department and keep the remaining herd at a sustainable size. It's an unusual arrangement. Part conservation, part community tradition, part fundraiser. And it's kept both sides of this population stable for nearly a century. The ponies themselves seem unaware of any of it. grazing along dune lines that shift quite literally with every storm season. On an island this exposed, that impermanence isn't a metaphor, it's daily life. North of the border, in British Columbia's Okanagan-Similkameen Valley, wild horses raise a question that reaches back much further than any herd we've covered so far. The standard scientific account holds that horses evolved in North America, then went extinct here around 10,000 years ago at the close of the last ice age, only returning with Spanish colonization in the 16th century. But the Syilx Okanagan Nation, whose traditional territory includes this valley, carries a different account, one passed down through oral history for generations. In their tradition, the horse was never absent. The Nsyilxan word for horse, elders say, is as old as the language itself. That claim has drawn interest from researchers on both sides of the divide. Archaeological work in the valley has uncovered ochre, a pigment used in ceremonial rock art, at sites estimated to be roughly 2,500 years old, opening the door to dating nearby pictographs that depict horses, work that remains ongoing. Separately, genetic research published by a Lakota evolutionary geneticist has pointed to horse DNA recovered from Yukon permafrost, dated to roughly 5,000 years ago, thousands of years after the commonly cited extinction date, though still thousands of years before Spanish contact. No study has yet resolved the gap between that data and the oral tradition of continuous presence going back further still. What is clear is that the conversation itself has value. It's pushed researchers to test assumptions that, until recently, few had thought to question at all. Two ways of knowing the same history, the laboratory and the oral tradition, and neither has fully answered the other yet. Which one moves you more? Tell us below. All of this, the DNA, the oral histories, the fossil record, feeds into a debate that shapes actual policy today. Is the wild horse a native species reclaiming its range, or an introduced species altering an ecosystem it was never part of? Ecologists who favor tighter management point to competition for forage and water with native wildlife, pronghorn, bighorn sheep, sage grouse, species already under pressure from habitat loss elsewhere. Unlike cattle, wild horses aren't rotated off the range seasonally, and unlike native grazers, they have no natural predator large enough to meaningfully limit their numbers in most of the West today. Advocates for the horses counter that the invasive species framing ignores tens of millions of years of equine evolution on this continent, and argue that current damage assessments often fail to separate horse impact from a century of heavier cattle grazing on the same land. Both sides can point to real data. Neither side has convinced the other. It's rare that a single species sits this precisely at the intersection of biology, law, and cultural identity, protected by federal statute, contested by working ranchers, claimed as ancestral kin by indigenous nations, and treated as a national icon by millions of Americans who will never see one outside a photograph. That collision of claims is exactly what makes the next part of this story so difficult to watch and so necessary to understand. When a herd grows past what its range can support, the primary tool federal managers still rely on is the helicopter roundup. A low-flying helicopter pushes a band of horses, sometimes for miles, toward a funnel of temporary fencing called a trap. It's loud, fast, and visually alarming. Dust, panic, animals running full speed across uneven ground. Injuries happen, Occasionally, animals die during a gather. Critics argue the method is inherently traumatic and call for it to be replaced entirely with fertility control. Land managers who defend the practice point to a different set of numbers. Helicopter gathers remain by a wide margin. The fastest and most cost-effective way to bring an overpopulated herd back down to a level the range can actually sustain. And they argue that leaving herds unmanaged leads to a slower, harder death by starvation and thirst, the same fate that struck those Arizona horses during drought. Neither side disputes the central fact driving all of this. Without some form of active management, many Western herds would outgrow their habitat within a decade. The disagreement isn't about whether horses need to be managed. It's about how and at what cost, paid by the animals themselves. Horses gathered in a roundup don't simply disappear into a bureaucracy after this. Many of them are headed toward a second chance, one being built deliberately as science catches up to the problem. There's a quieter tool now being used alongside the helicopter, one that doesn't require removing a single horse from the range at all. PZP, a fertility control vaccine delivered by Drought, temporarily prevents mares from conceiving without disrupting normal herd behavior, hierarchy, or social bonds. Herds managed with PZP have shown measurably slower population growth over time, reducing how often roundups are needed in the first place. It isn't a complete solution. It requires repeated darting, consistent tracking of individual mares, and years of patient fieldwork. But it represents something rare in this story, an option that doesn't force a choice between the animal's welfare and the range's survival. Horses removed from the range through gathers, meanwhile, increasingly end up not in long-term holding, but in adoption programs connecting them with private homes. A slower, more individual kind of solution, one horse and one family at a time. None of it is perfect. All of it is still evolving. The mountains that shaped Cloud are still shaping its descendants. The dry lake beds of Arizona will fill again and empty again on a cycle no policy can control. The DNA debates in the Pryors and in the Okanagan Valley are both, in their own ways, still open questions, evidence still being gathered, stories still being reconciled. What hasn't changed is the pull these animals have always had on the people who watch them. A silhouette on a ridge at golden hour, a childhood memory of a fence line and a horse that knew your name, a nation that once ran on hoofbeats, still keeping a small, stubborn piece of that world alive. Not because it's easy, but because something in us has never wanted to let it go. The wild horse in America was never simply free. It never will be, not entirely, but as long as there's a ridge left for it to stand on, it will keep looking like it was always meant to be there. Rationale. The fight in segment 2 ends on a cliffhanger about Cloud. The herd biology segment, formerly number 4, now pays that off immediately, keeping momentum in the highest risk retention window, first 8 minutes. The land of memory, formerly number 3, now sits directly before Cloud's story, where its nostalgia theme lands harder. Cloud's own arc, a 1995 home video project that became a national icon, is itself a story about memory. Segment 8's Layer 1/Layer 2/Layer 3 labels removed. That framing worked for an on-screen graphics package but reads like a lecture in pure VO. replaced with narrative transitions that carry the same three-part evidence structure by ear alone. All three on-screen comment bait text cards converted to spoken narrator lines consistent with VO-only delivery. No on-screen text dependency. Animal pronouns standardized to its/its throughout, including all references to cloud and named individuals per standing style policy. Human subjects, the filmmaker, researchers, retain standard pronouns. Segments 8 and 12 remain deliberately neutral, evidence-forward, and unresolved by design. The open question is the hook. All statistics and historical claims should be re-verified against current sourcing before final broadcast use. Several are drawn from 2023 to 2024 research and BLM data that may be updated. Archival cloud/PBS footage is not licensed for use here. Segment 5 is written to work entirely with new footage of the Pryor herd today, plus public domain or licensed still imagery per prior discussion.